Toyota time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today, what I'm going to share with you is my attempt to get my engine temps down a little lower. If you're familiar with our channel, you've seen all my attempts to get my engine to run cooler because my rig is heavily modified. I have a CBI front bumper, CBI rear bumper. I have a full belly of skids. I have a steel roof rack. The rig is just really heavy and the engine is working harder. And when the engine is working harder to propel the vehicle down the road, the temperature of the engine goes up. Some of the things that I've already done to help improve the engine temps is I did swap out the OEM Denso radiator for a Koyo aluminum radiator. That seemed to help a little bit. Some recent things that I did was relocate my Warn winch control box into the engine compartment because for a long time I just had that box bolted right to the winch, and that control box blocked some air getting to the cooling fins of the AC condenser and then eventually to the radiator. So I got that out of the way. I did have some wires routed in between an aftermarket transcooler and the AC condenser. That was for some bumper lights and for my aftermarket Tech Customs headlights. And so I routed those wires a little bit differently to where they would block less air. But still, my engine temps are higher than I'd like to see them. With my stock 4runner that is barely modified, that engine runs in the high 180s to low 190s. My 98 that's heavily modified, that engine runs in the 190s all the time. It can get up to the high 190s even when the ambient temps aren't really that high. And I will say that I'm currently running a rebuilt engine that I got from Yoda One Performance. I unfortunately suffered a cracked head, just like what happened to Sean's 2002 4runner, and so I decided to put a rebuilt engine from Yoda One. So all the coolant passageways through the block, through the heads, through the intake manifold should all be relatively clean, because when Yoda One rebuilds an engine, they boil the block and clean it out very well. They install new freeze plugs, so all the coolant passageways on my engine should be ideal. And I also replaced all of the coolant hoses, so all of my coolant hoses are brand new also. So my next attempt to see if I can improve my engine temps is I'm going to install this modified fan clutch that I got from the Redline Land Cruiser company. Redline is known for their work on Land Cruisers, but they're not necessarily known for doing stuff for other models like 4runners like I have. I did do an install of one of their modified fan clutches on my buddy Ray's 80 series Land Cruiser, and I did video that job. So if you're interested in looking at that, you could click on the link above and you can watch that video. So knowing that they modify fan clutches for Land Cruisers, I figured it was worth a try to ask them if they would do the same for other models. And I found out that they actually do. I talked to a really helpful and knowledgeable guy at the company. His name is Rodney, and he got me hooked up with this modified fan clutch. What they do to modify the fan clutch is they modify the bimetallic temperature sensitive spring that opens up the passageways for the CST fluid to flow and lock up the fan clutch. So the modification they do to the spring allows it to open up at a lower temperature than the OEM fan clutch was made to. So this one's going to open up somewhere around 95 degrees, I think is what it's meant to open up at. And I believe the OEM fan clutches open up at about 120 degrees. And when it comes to the temperature at which the spring will elongate and open up those fluid passageways, that's the heat coming off of the radiator. It's not in relation to the heat of the engine. So your engine could be at 190 degrees, but the air temperature coming through your hot radiator isn't at 190 degrees. It's at a cooler temperature. So that's why the bimetallic spring is set to elongate at a lower temperature than the actual engine is at, if that makes sense. And then the other thing that they do to make the fan clutch work better is they put a thicker CST fluid inside. So just like there's different grades of engine oils, there's also different grades of CST silicone fluid. So they pick a silicone fluid that's a little bit thicker, and then they add the same volume of oil that was in it originally, and then they put it back together. So my plan to scientifically test this to see if it's going to help with my engine temps is I'm going to drive a set route in my rig with the OEM fan clutch. And I'm going to pay attention to the temperatures my engine is running at with my scan gauge tool that I have connected to my OBD2 port. And then I'm going to come home. I'm going to swap this one in, which it won't take long. It's pretty quick. And then I'm going to go on the same drive and just see what temperatures I'm getting with the modified fan clutch. The temperature of the day might be a little hotter when I get around to testing this one, but the temperature of today in San Jose, California, where I live, is pretty moderate. It's only going to be in the 60s, so it's not going to be a huge temperature swing like I'm going to be testing the old one out at 60 degrees and this one out at 90 degrees. It's not going to be like that because that wouldn't be a very accurate test for this fan clutch. So I'm going to get out to my rig, take it for a drive, and I will film for you the temperatures I'm seeing on my scan gauge so you can see the temperatures. And then I'll do the same thing with the modified fan clutch, and I'm hopefully going to see an improvement in my temps, which would be awesome. All right, let's go for a drive. Before I take off on the test drive, another thing I will mention is I recently went from 33-inch tires to 34-inch tires and some method wheels with a negative 38 offset. So the bigger wheels are also causing a drag on my engine. My engine's working harder turning these bigger wheels. I am re-geared. I'm running 488 gears, so I have addressed that, but I'm still turning bigger tires and wheels, and that's going to affect the engine because the engine's working harder to turn those bigger wheels. Okay, let's get out on the drive. This is my scan gauge that I use to monitor several things. I'll just go through all four of them. The top left is showing the load on the engine. This one below is showing the intake air temperature. The top right is the charging volts, and the bottom right is the one I'm going to be paying close attention to. That is the engine temp. And I'll ask my Smarty Pants phone what the temperature outside is right now. What's the temperature outside?
It's 62 degrees in San Jose right now. There is currently a heat advisory in effect.
A heat advisory and it's 62 degrees. Doesn't make sense. Okay, let's go for a drive. For this test, I am going to run the AC at the first notch. I'm going to run it at low and full cold on the temperature adjustment knob. So I'll keep the AC running the whole time for both tests. For this test drive, I'm going to incorporate a mix of surface streets, mountain roads, and freeway to give a good variety of all the driving conditions I can come across. The thing that I've noticed with this 98 4Runner is when I come to a stop, there seems to be a heat sink that happens, meaning the temperature starts to rise when I come to a stop. And I don't really notice it that much on my stock 4Runner. I might notice like a 2 degrees difference, but with this 98 4Runner, when I come to a stop and it's idling, I can see a swing of as much as like 7 to 8 degrees, which is kind of crazy. And when you get a temperature increase like that, that tends to speak to a fan clutch issue. But my fan clutch in my truck right now is relatively new. It's probably only got like 30,000 miles on it. So I know it's not a fan clutch problem, and I will say that I tried even another fan clutch and I got the same result. So I'm hoping that the modified fan clutch is going to make a difference. Right now, I'm on the freeway, just cruising, going really mellow. My speedometer is off a little bit. It's about 5 miles per hour slow. So right now I'm going about 65, and it's because I'm running the bigger wheels and tires. So here's the temp right now, just cruising on the freeway, about 62 degrees out, and it's at a nice temp. 190 is a great temperature for these engines. I picked up the speed a little bit. Now I'm going at about 75 miles an hour. The temperature is still looking pretty damn good at 191. All right, I'm getting off the freeway, and we'll take a look at what the temps do on some surface streets after coming off the freeway. I'm still at a really good temp at 190. I'm coming up to a stoplight, and if I have to sit long enough, you'll be able to see a temperature increase on my scan gauge. Let's take a look. Came to a stop at 191. You see it jumped to 193. It's now at 195, so it's gone up 4 degrees so far. And it looks like that might be it. It might start coming down if I sit here long enough. The temperature spikes and then it will eventually come down. All right, the light changed. I got to keep going. And you'll see as soon as I get moving, the temperature is going to come down. It just dropped 2 degrees, and it'll drop more as I pick up the speed. And as I pick up the RPMs, and the fan clutch is turning faster. So now it's dropped back down to 191. So that's what I'm talking about with the heat sink. When you come to a stop, the engine isn't turning as fast, and thus the fan clutch isn't turning as fast. Less air is being pulled through the cooling fins, and you get a temperature increase. Sorry for the shaky footage, but this is about the best I can do while driving. So now I'm going to be heading toward some mountain roads above the town of Saratoga and putting a heavier load on the engine, and we'll see what kind of temps I see. I'm in the town of Saratoga. I just came to a stoplight, and let's see how much the temperature increases. I was basically driving on a downhill grade to this stoplight, so the engine wasn't under much of a load, so I might not see much of a temperature fluctuation as I did before. It just jumped 2 degrees to 193. Okay, the light changed. I gotta go. I can't wait any longer. All right, I'm gonna start going up the mountain road above Saratoga. It's Highway 9, and I'm gonna switch overdrive off. So overdrive is off, and I will even probably go down the second gear on some of the steeper hills I'm going to be going up on this test drive. What I've noticed is when there's a heavy load on the engine, that's when I start to see the temperature spike and get up into the higher 190s. I'm now turning on a steeper road, and let's see what the temp does. So going up that hill, it went to 195. I came to a stop, and I'm just going to sit here for a while to see how high the temp gets after going up that short hill. So it's got up to 197, 198. I'm just going to sit here until I see the temperature start to go down. I want to see how high it gets coming to a stop after the engine had to work a little bit. Okay, it's finally coming down. So it peaked at 198, and that's what I wanted to show you. When I started that short hill, I was running at about 191, and so the temperature spiked from that effort to 198. So that's a pretty big swing of 7 degrees. So now the road's gonna go downhill for a while and then climb again. And when I start climbing again, I'll start paying attention to the temperature. After coming down that hill, the temperature dropped back down to a nice 190 degrees. All right, the next hill is in front of me. It's pretty steep, but it's short. The temp is currently at 191. I'm gonna keep it in drive with overdrive off. I'm not gonna shift down into second gear. But normally, if I'm gonna do a steeper road climb and it's sustained, I might go into second gear to take some strain off my engine and my transmission. So on that climb, I got up to 195. Now it flattens out and the engine should start cooling down. All right, I'm turning from Mount Eden Road to Stevens Creek Canyon Road, and I'm going to take Stevens Creek Canyon Road to Redwood Gulch, which is a steep road and very sustained, and I believe that's going to be the best test to see if there's going to be a difference between the OEM fan clutch and the modified Redline fan clutch. I'll be turning off onto Redwood Gulch pretty soon, and that goes all the way back up to Highway 9 at a much higher elevation. And so on that road, I might be switching down to second gear to take a load off the engine and the transmission. All right, I'm coming up to the turn for Redwood Gulch. I'm gonna start in drive with overdrive off, but I know I'm most likely gonna switch into second at some point. I'm starting the climb at 191 degrees, and it looks like there's some road work going on, so I might have a delay. I came to a stop, and you can see the temperature spiked to 197, so now I'll keep climbing. But I am gonna switch into second. So you'll see the temp immediately dropped down to 191 just because the engine was turning a little faster. But this road is steep, and my engine is struggling to get my rig up here. Okay, I gotta come to a stop here. All right, they're waving me through. Okay, I'm coming up to the intersection of Highway 9. I'm gonna stop here for a second, just see what happens to the engine temp. It looked like 198 was gonna be the high. Somebody came behind me and I had to move, but it was stuck at 198 for a while, so it most likely was gonna start dropping. So now I'm gonna do a descent for a few miles, and obviously the temp's gonna come down. All right, I'm almost done with the test drive with the original fan clutch. Coming to another stoplight, and I'll be sitting here for a while. Let's see how high it gets. I rolled up at 191, it's at 193, and let's just see how high it climbs. It looks like it's only gonna have a 4-degree fluctuation this time. It's been at 195 for a while, and I have to get going now because the light changed. Okay, I'm a couple blocks from my house. I'll swap out the fan clutch as quick as possible and check what the ambient temp is, and then we'll get going on the second test drive. A new tool that I got from my buddy Dwayne that makes the rear axle tool sets for Toyota and Lexus SUVs and trucks is this tool right here. You see it's got the 3 notches, and this basically connects to 3 of the 4 12mm nuts that hold the fan clutch onto the fan bracket. And this is a tool that you can use to turn the pulley to get the nut into a position where you could easily get it with a long box end 12mm like I have from Gear Wrench. And it enables you to be able to tighten and loosen them without the pulley turning. Sometimes the belt tension is tight enough that you can loosen all the nuts without having to use some type of holder tool like this. In the past, I've wedged a small pry bar or screwdriver between 2 opposing nuts to hold it steady while I break free the nuts and while I tighten them. But this tool from Dwayne is a nice improvement. So I'm gonna get all the nuts loose and then I'll take them off. While you're using this tool, you don't wanna loosen a nut and then take it off, because then you'll be resting the threads of the fan bracket studs against this and you might mash the threads and then mess them up. So you wanna keep all the nuts on until all 4 nuts are loose, and then you can take them off the rest of the way. Okay, that one's loose, and now I'm gonna turn it to get the next one in that kind of 10 o'clock position so I can loosen it with my left hand. So I'm just turning over the engine with this tool. You can also get onto the crank bolt with a 19mm socket and big ratchet and do it that way too. Okay, I got the next one in position. Gonna loosen that one. Okay, that one's loose, and I'm gonna turn the assembly to the next one. It's a little hard to turn the engine over, but you can do it. Okay, got the next one in position. Okay, that one's loose, and keep on turning the engine. Okay, I think that was the last one. I should be able to remove them with my hand. Got to loosen them up a little bit more. Just want them all finger tight. Okay, I think I got them all loose enough. With the belt still tensioned, it might tweak on the pulley a little bit and get them tight again. I might have to loosen them up with a wrench, but I'm going to try to work them all off with my fingers now. This one tightened up a little bit on me. Dropped it. Now here's a situation where I'm not able to get my fingers in there very effectively. Well, I could get them with the 2-finger here. Let me see if I can get this one without dropping it. I'm going to use a magnet to help me not drop it. Okay, I grabbed it with my magnet. I have one more on the bottom. See if I can get that with 2 fingers underneath. Yep, I could get it. Now I'm going to use the magnet again. And I got the final one. And then I should be able just to work this off. If this has been a long time since it's been removed, it might be really bonded to this outer pulley, but this has been off recently on my engine, so it should come off without much of a fight. There we go. And I'm going to try to bring it out this way. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put 1 or 2 of the nuts back on just to keep the pulley stable so it doesn't potentially come off. I don't think it will, but the belt tension wants to pull it off the pulley. Just 1 will do it, so I'm just going to keep 1 on there for now. And now I'm going to put the fan onto the Redline modified fan clutch. These I'm not going to tighten with my impact gun. I'm going to do this with a 1/4 inch ratchet. The torque spec for these is really light. And I'm just using that German spec good and tight. I'm not going crazy because I have a short 1/4 inch ratchet. I'm choking up on a little bit and I'm just cinching them up snug. I don't want to strip them. And I'm calling that good. Now I'll get this back onto the vehicle. I'm first going to take off that one nut that is helping the pulley from coming off the studs. I'm going to fit the fan through on the driver's side, going towards the passenger side. And I'm going to get the nuts started. To help me out, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn over the crankshaft clockwise as I'm looking at it to get each nut at the top. This is going to help me get the nuts on without dropping them. So I have my 1/2 inch drive ratchet with a short 19mm socket, and I'm going to get that onto the crank bolt. It's a little bit difficult because the fan's partially in your way, but you just got to rotate the fan while you're getting the wrench in place. Okay, I got it on there, and I'm going to turn it, get the next stud right at the 12 o'clock position where it's easy for me to get it started. Got that one. I'm going to rotate the engine again. And then I got to rotate it a final time to get the last one started. All right, they're all started. And now I'm going to tighten them up with my box end wrench. I'm first just going to go as tight as I can until the tightening starts turning the whole pulley. Might be able to get them pretty tight without even using the special tool I got from Dwayne, but I'm going to rotate the next one in position and slowly get them touched down. I'm going to turn each one of them just a little bit. Well, I could get them pretty tight without even using the holder tool. I might not even need it because there's so much resistance from the belts. Got it to turn just a little bit there. That's pretty darn tight. I'm going to do the final tightening now. So that's number 1. Number 2. Number 3. That turned a little bit, but they're all really nice and tight. There is a torque spec for this, but you can't get a torque wrench in there. The best you can do, if you live and die by the torque value, you can get on there with a crow's foot, maybe, but just go by feel by using a box end wrench like this, like a little bit of a longer one. I'll put a link in the video description to the ones I have. They're affordable and they're really nice. They have a ratcheting side and then a regular 12-point box end side. So if your belt tension wasn't as tight as mine and it was slipping, then you would have to use some type of tool like this special tool that Dwayne makes that I'll link in the video description, or you can do the trick of putting a pry bar or screwdriver between 2 neighboring nuts and hold it that way, whatever you want to do. But you saw that because my belt tension is properly tight, I didn't have to use any holder tool to get them tightened up. All right, I got the fan clutch swapped out probably in about 10-15 minutes, and now I'm going to go on another test drive. Let me check my Smarty Pants phone and see what the temperature is. What's the temperature outside? Okay, it's about 5 degrees hotter than when I did the first test, so that can affect the result, but it's not such a big temperature swing that it's going to make a huge difference. So I'm going to go out on the test drive and see how it goes with the new fan clutch. Just like with the first test drive, I'm starting off on the freeway. Similar temp, it's at 191, and we'll be getting off in Los Gatos pretty soon and heading over to Saratoga to hit those mountain roads. All right, I'm getting off the freeway and hopefully I'll come to a light and we'll be able to see what the temperature does when I have to stop for a while. I'm actually just going to pull off over here in this neighborhood and see if I can give it a little more time without being forced to move because of a light. It's at 191, jump to 193, jump to 195. Okay, it looks like it's just going to top out at 195, so that was a 4-degree swing. Seems a little bit better than before, but I'll be able to tell more when we hit the hills. Okay, I'm back in Saratoga. We're on Highway 9, and we're gonna work our way to Pierce Road, and then eventually to Redwood Gulch again. For this first climb, again, I'm gonna be in drive with overdrive off. I'm currently at 191 degrees. All right, I'm turning on Pierce Road. Gonna go up this climb and then stop at the top and just see how high my temperature gets sitting there for a while. All right, I crested the hill and I'm gonna sit here for a little bit and see how high it gets. It's at 193 right now. It jumped to 195, 197. Okay, it started dropping down. So that was a 4 degrees swing. And I think I remember the last time I got to the top of this hill, I think the temperature swing was about 7 degrees and it got up to 198. So that is a small improvement. So I'm going to continue the drive and hit the next hill. I just crested the next hill and I liked what I saw. I was at about a 70% load on the engine. That's a pretty good load. And the temp was about 191 to 193 with that load. And I think the reason why I was able to stay that low is because the fan clutch is turning closer to 1 for the engine. But as you can see right now, the temperature has increased when I came to a stop. It spiked a little bit. I rolled up at about 193 and now it's at 197. Let's see if it gets any higher. It hasn't moved from 197. I assume it's going to start dropping in temp, so I'm going to keep going. All right, I'm coming up on the steepest road on the test drive, Redwood Gulch. I will be, again, climbing this in second gear, and we'll see how the engine temps do. I'm starting off at 193, and it just dropped down to 191 as I gave it a little bit more gas, which is going to turn the fan a little faster. You can see the load on the engine. It's 69% load. And engine temp is only at 191, which is nice to see. I just got stopped by the road work crew, so let's see how high the temp gets while I'm waiting for them to let me through. I rolled up at 191, now it's at 195, and that was after a pretty hard effort on the engine. I was at about a 70% load on the engine. Okay, it jumped to 197, so it's jumped 6 degrees sitting here. 7 degrees. Now I'm going again. They let me through. I'm coming up to the top of the road again, and I'm going to stop and again see where the engine temp gets sitting for a while after it's been under a load. Just going to pull off right here. I'm not suspecting it's going to get as high as before, because after I waited for the road construction, the engine wasn't working that hard. So it jumped a couple degrees. Now it's jumped 4 degrees. So it looks like it's just gonna top out at 195 and go down, but I'll wait till it drops. What I learned is the heat sink of when you come to a stop is more dramatic after a heavier load on the engine. So after the engine's been working hard to get up a climb or whatever, once you come to a stop and less air is being pulled through the cooling fins, because you no longer have air being pushed through, it's just being pulled through from the fan. So you're relying 100% on the amount of air being pulled through by the mechanical fan to cool your engine. You no longer can rely on any air pushing through from the wind. It's been sitting at 195 for a while, probably about a minute, minute and a half. It finally dropped to 193. It took a while. I would say that took over 3 minutes to drop down in temperature. And I think that's just because the RPMs of the engine aren't as high. When you're at an idle, even with the AC running, I'm currently at 600 RPMs, but when the AC compressor kicks on, it'll probably jump up to around 700 or more. And so because the engine isn't turning as fast, the fan isn't turning as fast, and it's not pulling as much air through the cooling fins of the radiator and the AC condenser and my external transcooler. All right, I'm going to complete the drive and get back home. I'm back home, the engine's just idling, and I'm at 190 degrees. So now what I'm going to do is analyze all of the video footage and give you my final thoughts in the closing statement. All right, I analyzed the video footage, and then I drove my truck for about a week, and a couple of the days in the area where I live got up to about 90 degrees. And I have to say, I really like what I'm seeing from my engine temperature, especially when it's under a load. The engine is staying at a nice temperature right around the low 190s, like 190 to 193. It does still do that heat sink thing. When I come to a stop, I could watch the temperature of the engine go up about 4 to 6 degrees. And I don't know if there's really anything I could do about that. I know hands down that the fan clutch is now locking up more positively than it did with the OEM fan clutch, but I think it's just a simple fact that the engine is turning slower. At an idle, my engine turns at about 600 RPMs, and that's just not enough to keep the engine cool after it's been under a load. But it eventually will come down after it spikes a little bit. One trick that I know that I can do, if I know if I'm going to be parked for a while and I want my engine to run a little bit cooler, I could simply shift it into neutral or shift it into park, raise the RPMs up to about 1500, and the engine temperature quickly plummets down to a nice temperature. When you know you've addressed all of the big things that could possibly cause you a engine overheating problem, like knowing that your engine cooling system isn't encumbered with a bunch of corrosion and rust deposits, so all the cooling channels are running freely, knowing that you have a properly working thermostat, knowing that you have a properly working water pump, knowing that the fan clutch is working, that it's not defective. Then you start looking for other things that you can do to improve your engine temp when you have a heavily modified rig like mine. So I relocated the control box that was bolted to the winch, and I relocated it to the engine compartment. I installed an aluminum coil radiator with a better cooling capacity than the OEM radiators. I even did a hood lift modification by buying some lift blocks that I got from the company Solve Function. This modification allows for more heat to easily escape the engine compartment. Another way you can go about doing that is by adding some hood louvers, but for now I didn't want to go that route and cut into my hood and add louvers. I wanted to try this out first. I'll put a link in the video description to those hood lift blocks from Solve Function if you'd like to try them out yourself. So again, if you have a heavily modified rig like mine and the engine is working harder because it's heavy from all the armor you've put on it, and the engine's working harder because of the bigger wheels you got on it, then I do believe that getting this modified fan clutch from Redline Land Cruisers is a worthwhile way to go. The fan clutch is now locking up more positively. When it locks up, it's turning closer to 1-for-1 with the revolutions of the engine than it was before with the OEM fan clutch. So it's going to be pulling more air through the cooling fans and dropping the temperature of the engine. If you have a fairly stock rig and you're not heavily modified like my rig is, and you know that you need a new fan clutch because it's failing, then you certainly could go with an OEM fan clutch. I believe this modified fan clutch from Redline Land Cruisers is more for guys like me that has a heavily modified rig, which is putting extra strain on the engine and thus raising the engine temperature to sometimes dangerous levels. So every little thing you can do like this fan clutch modification is going to help keep your engine cooler and avoid you overheating your engine and destroying it. There have been a couple times where I have resorted to extreme measures to keep my engine cooler. One time I was driving through Las Vegas coming back from southern Utah, and the ambient temp was like 115. It was like an inferno out there, and I had to turn the AC off. I had to crank the heat on full blast and just endure the really hot temp while I was climbing these grades going back home to California, because the ambient temp was so freaking hot that my engine was going to overheat. I saw all kinds of carnage all over the freeway, people overheating their engine. And I know those people weren't monitoring their engine temp like I do to know when it's prudent to do things like turning the heat on to keep the engine temp down, or maybe just pull over and give your engine a rest before you continue on. So knowledge is power and ignorance isn't always bliss. So monitoring your engine temp some way is a good way to go. The stock analog engine temperature gauge is a horrible, horrible way to monitor your engine temp, because by the time that needle starts to rise, it's too late. You've already overheated your engine. So I highly recommend you keep a close eye on your engine temp, especially when you're in very hot ambient temps, and a scan gauge or an ultra gauge is a good way to go. I'll put a link in the video description to the scan gauge tools I run in both of my 3rd Gen 4runners. I hope you learned something from this video and you now have more knowledge to be able to keep your engine running at a much nicer and lower temperature so you don't do damage to it and cause yourself a very costly and expensive repair of repairing or replacing your engine. So with all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. We will, of course, be back with more videos. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Click on that subscribe button and also click on that notification bell if you'd like to be notified when we put up new content on our channel, which we are always putting up very helpful and sick mods kind of content like this video here. Peace out, happy wrenching, happy sick modifying, bye-bye.